The sun was setting low behind the skyscrapers of Manhattan, casting long golden shadows on the street. Donald Trump, wearing an old Yankees cap, a simple green hoodie, and worn jeans, opened the door to a small but luxurious restaurant tucked between two glass towers. No tie. No cufflinks. Just a man who looked like just another tired construction worker looking for dinner. The maitre d' barely looked up before he forced a fake smile. "Excuse me, sir, it's a private event tonight," he said in a tight voice, looking disdainfully at Trump's casual attire. Donald nodded politely and stepped aside, surveying the room. Inside, the restaurant was buzzing with elegant men in tailored suits, women in sparkling cocktail dresses. Champagne flowed like a river. The cutlery gleamed. This was a place where appearance was currency, and Trump, who looked as if he had just stepped off a construction site, was not a welcome guest. Two young waiters at the bar were openly giggling, not even trying to hide it. "Some people have no shame," one said, loud enough to be heard. "Probably lost," laughed another. Laughter, sharp and easy, swept through several nearby tables. Trump heard everything. Every word. He didn't frown. He didn't snap. He just looked around slowly, methodically, as if he were making mental notes, and he smiled, that smile that didn't reach his eyes, that smile that meant something more was already happening. Without another word, Trump turned on his heel and walked back out into the fading light, pulling his phone out of his pocket. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He was busy calling his lawyer, busy calling his broker, busy buying the entire building, because if Donald Trump learned anything early, it's that you don't have to yell to change rooms. Sometimes you just have to be yourself. And tomorrow, when the staff comes in, the restaurant won't belong to those who laughed at it, will belong to a man they thought was completely unfit for the job. And the first task: figure out exactly which names need to be crossed off the employee list. The next morning, the city woke up busy and distracted, like it always did, but inside that sleek little restaurant hidden between two towers, flooded with glass and marble, the air felt different, uneasy. The staff arrived at 8 a.m. as usual, same black ties. Same practiced smiles, same superiority tucked neatly into their starched shirts. Only today, something was wrong. The maitre d', the same one who had smirked at Trump last night, was met at the door by a man in a crisp black suit holding a clipboard. "Name?" the man asked sharply. The maitre d' blinked. "Excuse me?" "Name," the man repeated. He gave it, confused, and watched as the man scanned down a list, paused, circled something. "Please wait inside," he said curtly. He wasn't the only one. Waiters, hostesses, bartenders, all lined up like students in the principal's office, whispering nervously, shifting on their feet. The atmosphere inside the restaurant was tight enough to snap. The chandeliers above still sparkled, the marble floors still gleamed, but everyone felt it. The ground had shifted. At exactly 8:45 a.m., the front doors opened, and Donald Trump walked in. Same casual clothes, same calm expression. No bodyguards. No entourage, just him, and behind him 3 more men in suits, carrying folders and a thick sheaf of papers. Trump didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked straight to the center of the lobby, turned slowly, and faced them all: the waiters, the bartenders, the maitre d', the ones who had laughed at him when they thought he was nobody. He paused long enough that the silence became unbearable. Then he said, simply, "As of this morning, this building and everything inside it belongs to me." A ripple of stunned gasps moved through the room. Trump pulled a folded set of documents from his jacket and held them up casually. "Closed the deal last night." He smiled, but it was the kind of smile you feel in your spine. "Effective immediately," he continued, voice steady, sharp as a scalpel, "there will be changes." He nodded toward the man with the clipboard. The man stepped forward and began reading off names. Each name was met with a simple phrase: "Dismissed, dismissed, dismissed. The maitre d' paled visibly. One of the waiters tried to open his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to beg, but Trump cut him off with a small lift of his hand. I remember faces, Trump said, his voice a little colder now. And I remember laughter. He let the words hang, heavy, final. And let me make something very clear, he said, taking a slow step closer, voice lowering into something razor sharp. You don't get to decide who deserves respect based on their clothes, you don't get to decide who matters based on how they look when they walk through the door. He looked around, meeting every set of guilty, burning eyes. You show respect to everyone, Trump said, his voice now so quiet it forced them to lean in, because you never know who's about to own the room you're standing in. By 9:30 a.m. The restaurant was silent. The ones who had laughed were gone, their polished shoes clacking hollowly against the sidewalk as they disappeared into the city. Inside, the remaining staff stood a little straighter, looked each other in the eyes differently, because sometimes it only takes one man walking in like he doesn't belong to show everyone else just how little they ever really owned. Trump turned toward the manager he had appointed, a quiet, middle-aged woman who had been the only one to greet him kindly the night before. Get some coffee started, he said, voice warming just slightly. And next time someone walks in hungry, no matter what they're wearing, you feed them. The woman nodded, her eyes glinting with something halfway between gratitude and awe. Trump tipped his cap once, casually, and walked out the door he now owned, because real power isn't in yelling the loudest, that it's in deciding the rules quietly, absolutely, when the time comes. And yesterday, they had laughed at a man in worn jeans. Today, they worked for him, and they would never forget it. That night, when Donald Trump stepped back into the restaurant he now owned, the place was different, but not completely. The chandeliers still glowed overhead, the soft hum of conversations filled the air, the expensive dishes still arrived on polished silver trays, but beneath the surface, something buzzed. That it wasn't fear, not that it was tension, the kind that comes when people realize everything has changed, but don't know yet what comes next. Trump, dressed sharply but simply a black suit, no tie, moved through the space with quiet authority. Eyes followed him, hands fumbled with napkins, whispers rippled across tables. The new maitre d', the kind woman who had treated him with respect days earlier, greeted him warmly. Good evening, Mr. Trump, she said with genuine pride. Your table is ready. He nodded and followed her to the best seat in the house, a corner table with a view of the city's sprawling lights. That as he passed, the kitchen staff, the waiters, even the bartenders subtly straightened their posture. Everyone wanted to be seen now, everyone wanted to prove they belonged, because they all knew, the man they had laughed at could now decide their future with a glance. Trump sat down quietly. That he didn't demand attention, that he didn't boast, that he simply observed, watched how people moved, watched who rushed to help guests and who dragged their feet, watched who smiled out of kindness and who smiled out of fear. That he didn't need speeches, that he didn't need punishments, that he would decide everything later. Tonight was for watching, tonight was for measuring the room, because power isn't about speaking first, that it's about knowing when to wait. Dinner was simple, a steak, rare, just how he liked it, with a strong black coffee. While he ate, guests approached one by one. Some offered stiff smiles, some offered apologies hidden under jokes, some said nothing at all, but their eyes begged for forgiveness. Trump acknowledged them politely but distantly, that he wasn't here for their apologies, that he was here for something bigger. If anyone had really learned, near the end of the meal, as the lights dimmed slightly for the evening rush, a young dishwasher barely 20 nervously approached his table. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke. Sir, thank you, the boy said, for giving us a second chance. Trump looked at him, not through him, and nodded once. Work hard, he said simply. The boy nodded fiercely, a little stunned, and backed away. Trump smiled faint, private. There was still hope for the place after all, but deep down, he knew, this was only the beginning. That it wasn't enough to buy a building, that it wasn't enough to fire the fools. Now he had to build something better, something stronger, something that no one could laugh away again, not ever. Because power isn't just taking control, it's changing the soil so what grows after you lasts longer than your own shadow. And tomorrow, Trump would start planting. The next morning, before the sun even lifted over Manhattan, Donald Trump was already back inside the building. This time, he didn't come alone. 2 consultants walked beside him, professionals who didn't work for applause, only for results, men who rebuilt companies the way a blacksmith reforges steel with fire and precision. Trump didn't waste time on flowery speeches and empty promises. That he gathered the entire staff in the center of the dining room. The same place where he had once stood invisible, judged for the hoodie on his back. Now he stood in front of them as the owner, and everyone knew this was not a conversation. That it was a reckoning. That he started simply. This place had good bones, Trump said, voice low but carrying across the marble and glass. But it was run by people who thought appearances mattered more than character. The words hit like a hammer. Nobody interrupted, nobody dared. Trump walked slowly across the room, hands clasped behind his back. That ends today, he continued. If you're here just to serve the rich and ignore everyone else, you can leave now. He paused, silence, nobody moved, not yet. That he let the moment stretch heavy, uncomfortable, cleansing. From now on, Trump said, turning sharply to face them, this restaurant doesn't judge by the suit, the shoes, or the watch. He jabbed a finger toward the velvet chairs and crystal glasses. This building will be known for respect first, profit second. He pointed to the staff. You treat the janitor like you treat the CEO, you greet the construction worker the same way you greet a senator. His voice sharpened, slicing through the air, because you will never know who is standing in front of you. And then, lowering his tone even further to the kind of dangerous quiet that makes men sweat, and after what happened here, you should be very careful about who you laugh at. Then came the real change. Trump walked to a table stacked with sealed folders. Inside, performance reviews, personal evaluations, customer feedback files that the previous management had ignored or buried. That he opened the first one. Named names, praised the dishwasher who stayed late every night scrubbing until his hands bled, praised the coat check girl who lent her own jacket to an elderly woman caught in the rain. And then he named the cowards, the ones who laughed, the ones who sneered, the ones who thought they were safe behind polished smiles and expensive cologne. Each name was followed by one word, terminated. And one by one, they were escorted out. No drama. No second chances, because second chances were for those who fought to stand tall, not those who kicked others when they were low. By noon, the restaurant had new management policies on the wall, written in bold, simple words: respect every customer, serve with dignity, not arrogance, you never know who you are serving. Character matters more than clothes. No second chances for disrespect, and at the bottom, in Trump's unmistakable handwriting: we remember laughter. We reward kindness. Within hours, you could feel the change. The waiters smiled without stiffness, the hosts greeted guests like they were welcoming old friends, and outside, in a city where money usually shouted louder than manners, the word began to spread: there's a restaurant where you matter because you exist, not because you dress the part. Trump didn't stay long that day. That he wasn't there for applause, that he didn't pose for press photos, that he didn't give interviews, that he stood near the front door for a moment, watching the staff bustle, the kitchen roar to life, the guests begin to trickle in. A different kind of crowd now, more families, more regular working folks, more people who walked in with heads high, not worried if their shoes were polished enough. And Trump smiled, a real smile this time, because he hadn't just bought a restaurant, that he had changed the rules of the whole building, and maybe, just maybe, started changing the city. 2.3 weeks later, Donald Trump stepped out of his car onto the same sidewalk, under the same towering skyline, but the street felt different now. The marble on the building's front gleamed brighter, the windows sparkled as if they were proud to show what was inside. The door swung open before he could reach it, not out of fear, out of respect. The new maitre d', the one who had welcomed him that first night, stood there, smiling warmly. "Good evening, Mr. Trump," she said. "Welcome back." Trump tipped his head slightly, almost in greeting that he wasn't a king, that he wasn't royalty, but the weight he carried, the weight of someone who had reshaped this place from the inside out, was impossible to miss. Inside, the restaurant buzzed, but not with the brittle, fake noise of desperate money and shallow laughter. This was different. Families ate together without being rushed out because they didn't order the most expensive wine. Workers in dusty boots shared late dinners without anyone rolling their eyes at them. Bold couples, teenagers, artists all filled the tables under the golden chandeliers, laughing, smiling, breathing easy. The staff moved between them like dancers, light and respectful, serving everyone with the same gentle dignity. No one was invisible anymore. No one was measured by their wallet. This was a different restaurant now, that a different place. And Trump? He was the quiet architect behind every small act of kindness happening at every table. That he didn't announce his arrival. He simply moved through the room slowly, absorbing it all. At one table, he saw the dishwasher, the young boy who had approached him nervously weeks ago, now promoted to assistant server, proudly carrying plates without dropping his eyes. At another table, he saw a woman in a simple coat, laughing loudly with her children, not worrying for a second whether she belonged there. In the far corner, an older man in a patched jacket was being served a glass of wine with the same ceremony as the man in the tailored suit at the next table. Trump watched it all. And for a rare moment, he allowed himself to feel it, not pride in himself, but pride in what could happen when the right standard was set. The staff knew he was there, but they didn't swarm him, they didn't fawn, they simply worked harder, because the real respect, the one that changes how a room breathes, doesn't come from orders. It comes from who you become when someone expects the best from you. And everyone here now knew. You don't know who's watching, so you do your best anyway. Trump was shown to his table quietly. No velvet ropes. No special fanfare, just a table by the window, the city light sprawling behind him like a living painting. That he ordered coffee, simple, black. When the waiter set it down, he leaned in and said softly, "Sir, thank you, you changed everything here." Trump didn't answer immediately. He sipped his coffee, letting the words settle. Then he said, quietly, "I didn't change you, you chose to change." The waiter stood straighter, chest lifting slightly, and walked away a different man. As he sipped his coffee, Trump realized, he hadn't just bought a building, that he hadn't just cleaned out bad employees, that he had planted something. An expectation, a memory, a standard, and it had taken root, not in the marble, not in the contracts. And the people. And the way they treated each other now. Even when they thought no one important was watching, that was the real power, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't die. And Donald Trump, the man they once laughed at, sat quietly, unnoticed by the world outside, but inside that building, inside that living, breathing new creation, he was unforgettable, without ever needing to say a word. Donald Trump stood near the door, his hand resting briefly on the polished brass handle. The city outside blinked with restless energy, neon signs slicing the darkness. Inside, the restaurant hummed quietly, alive in a new way, not buzzing from ego, not drowning in false luxury, but breathing with real dignity. He allowed himself one last look over his shoulder. The chandeliers still gleamed overhead, but now their light fell differently across faces, not masked with arrogance, but lifted by pride. He saw workers moving like they mattered, saw guests smiling at staff without expecting to be bowed to. He saw kindness where there had once been coldness, service without servitude, pride without poison. And he knew, this place was no longer the same, because he hadn't just bought marble and glass, that he had bought the chance for better, and better had taken root. That he stepped outside, the cool city air kissed his face, brisk and sharp, carrying 1,000 unseen stories in every gust. The doorman, a graying man in a simple jacket, opened the door and gave him a small nod, the kind of gesture that wasn't about fear, or title, or paycheck. That it was about something older, respect, real, earned, honest respect. Trump nodded back, one businessman to another, because no matter what their lives looked like on paper, out here in the real world, they both knew what it meant to fight every day for a place you didn't have to apologize for standing in. He didn't call for a car. He didn't wait for applause. That he tucked his hands into his coat pockets and started walking alone, powerful, silent. One more figure lost among the endless march of New Yorkers, blending into the crowd like mist slipping between the cracks of a restless city. No flashing cameras chased him. No news anchor shouted his name, because some victories aren't meant to be televised. They're meant to be felt, deep, quiet, permanent. As he walked, he thought back not to the money spent, not to the contract signed, but to the moment they had laughed at him. The laughter had been easy, effortless, cheap. It always was. Judging was simple when you thought you already knew who mattered, but tonight the laughter was gone. It had been replaced by a silence far heavier, far louder, the silence of respect, the silence of regret, the silence of lessons learned the hard way. And it was that silence that would outlive every sneer, every insult, every careless word. Somewhere behind him, in that now busy restaurant, a young dishwasher wiped down a table with pride. A single mother served dinner to a businessman who thanked her properly. An old man in a faded jacket was offered the best seat in the house without question. Tiny moments, invisible to the world, but they mattered. Because real change doesn't happen with parades. It happens when a man in old boots gets the same smile as a man in polished leather shoes, when a waiter serves a meal with the same grace to a janitor as to a millionaire, when people remember not because they're forced, but because they finally understand. You never know who you're standing in front of. Donald Trump kept walking, block after block, streetlight after streetlight, past the crowds who never knew what had shifted behind him, past the flashing lights of a city too busy to notice greatness slipping through its veins. He smiled to himself, a small, private smile that had nothing to do with money or fame, because he had built bigger things than towers. He had built a moment in time where kindness had been carved into stone, and no headline would ever capture it. No microphone would ever amplify it, but the people inside that building would carry it in how they served, in how they looked at each other, in how they chose to never again laugh at the wrong man. As he disappeared into the endless tide of New York, Donald Trump left behind no speech, no announcement, no monument, only a room, only a memory, only a standard so high that laughter could never reach it again. And that, in the end, was the only victory worth having, the kind no one could ever take back, the kind built on silence, the kind that lasts.